Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in this evening. We would like to thank you for being a part of the very first of 4 series that TBP organization has put together. I would like to thank the Southeast Seventh-day Adventist Church for hosting these events. A few months ago, when we decided to do this, TBP, our goal was to put together for the month of May some ways in which people can kind of like come away from what's happening, what's going on. Just give them some strategies and some ideas to take their minds off of the pandemic. Maybe some of you all are working from home, your kids are at home. So we just wanted to feed into your mental health and give you some healthy mental health ways to be able to kind of like cope. So what we did was we have a series of what we're calling just like mental health or ways to cope during this COVID-19 pandemic. So I reached out to Leah Mills-Chapman. I've known Leah for a very long time. I watched her as a young little girl, teenager, and now I see that she is a licensed social worker. She has her own business, but she really has a passion for what she does. So we really know that she is more than qualified to speak on this subject and to leave us with ways in which we can come out of this feeling mentally sound, mentally balanced, and just overall, just give us some tidbits about this. Like I said, when TBP first thought about this, we was like on the cuffs of the pandemic, but now there's so many layers to it. Every time you turn around, there's something else that's adding to what's already been going on. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Leah, and she's going to come to us in her own way. Thank you, Leah.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much, Tracy. I appreciate the kind words. I appreciate and I'm honored to be here with you all this evening to just briefly share just a tad bit regarding our mental well-being during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're going to first kind of touch on our objectives and what we will be looking at for this evening. We're going to discuss a few common diagnoses or mental health concerns that seem to be arising amidst COVID-19. We're going to touch just very briefly, I won't elongate or go into too much depth regarding the effects or the adverse effects that the African American community has been experiencing during this time. And then, as Tracy indicated, we will be going into some ways that we can identify coping measures or strategies to be able to assist us through this process. And we know definitely that God is going to be the center of it all. But we will, look at some practical strategies that we can do to assist us as we continue through these perilous times. So we're going to begin and we're going to look at stress. The definition of stress is simply a physical or mental or emotional factor that causes some sort of tension within the body as well as the mind. Stress is most always driven by fear. There is often a perceived threat from something from the external standpoint or either an internal situation. And in this instance, we're looking at the COVID-19 pandemic. So that would be, again, for most of us, an external situation that is bringing us to a point of having an exponential amount of stress. We know that with stress that it can be overwhelming to the psyche. It can create strong emotions, and you'll see here that I've indicated my favorite 3 Fs, and that is fight, flight, or freeze. And so our minds tend to take in or perceive this threat, and so we'll have a physiological response within our bodies that says, hey, I need to get up out of here, I got to run, right? So that's our flight. Or, I'm fighting for my life. And so most times we see that it is, an interaction with someone. But I think, and it's interesting, I think that I've heard it from a political standpoint as well, that this fight towards this germ, right, is like imminent. Like we are physically fighting a germ. And that's how we see it. But the reality is that, right, this is something that we really cannot manipulate on our own. We have to kind of sit with the adverse effects of it and wait until, right, either the Lord decides to move and he blesses us with some sort of outcome that assists us in having a measure of health and returning possibly back to a level of normalcy. And then the third F again is the freeze component. So sometimes those emotions can be so overwhelming that we really don't know what to do. And so we just freeze up and we just kind of sit without any sort of insight or direction into what to do. And that can be overwhelming to the mind and the body as well. So the fear today and tomorrow, right? So what is it? This stress is looking like a fear or a worry about our own physical health, right? Or the health of our loved ones. I think many of us have either known someone that was directly in connection with us, whether it be our immediate family system, or it could be colleagues and or friends. But I believe even if we don't know anyone personally, just seeing it through the media tends to bring about a level of fear and or concern about our own health. We know that with the stress of this pandemic that you will see some changes potentially in your sleep or your eating patterns. I know for me, I tend to be a night owl, but it's getting a bit out of control. So my night owl is moving into the wee hours of the morning, and then I'm waking up super early because I still have to engage in a level of work. And so my sleep habits are off. Eating is off. We'll find that, we may not feel like eating anything at any given, moment. We may be not engaging in our 3 square meals a day. We may just be snacking. So we will find again that you may see differences in your eating patterns. You may have difficulty concentrating on one particular thing, especially with us having to be at home and working, right? Or either helping our children with their work, their school work, that it's kind of hard to stay focused on the task at hand. You have some physiological responses again, where you may have headaches. You may identify that you may be having some digestive situations going on, like, okay, why am I having a difficult time, right? With just simple things such as a bowel movement, right? We don't know that the psyche is taking in a lot of the stimulus around us and it is affecting our bodies. Science tends to like to separate the mind and the body, but we know that we are one. That is our control center, and it does have a direct effect on our bodies and its physiological responses. So for those that may be aware that they have some sort of mental health concern, you may see an increase or worsening of that particular mental health condition. And we'll talk a bit further on the 3 that you see here on the screen. We'll look at depression today. We'll look at just briefly anxiety and trauma and person's trauma responses. And then again, with COVID-19 and the increase of stress, Some people are turning to substances. Some may have already been engaging in substances, and now they're seeing that there is an increase in their use. So all of these things, again, are very normal. So we don't want you to come down on yourself or think that, oh my goodness, right? We can become hypochondriacs to a certain degree, meaning that whatever we see now, it's us, right? We have taken it and we're owning it and wearing that thing, and we don't want that to happen. So we want to normalize these responses today. So let's keep going. So again, as we're saying, that the mind is the control center of the body, and it does control how we actually feel on the inside. So our thoughts control or actually influence our feelings, and then that thus influences our behavior or our actions on a day-to-day basis. So let's look at anxiety. So the stress of COVID-19, we will see in a manifestation of anxiety, right? And that is kind of what that worry does for us. So to define anxiety, it is an emotion that's characterized again by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like an increase in blood pressure. I was speaking with someone just the other evening, and I mean, she was extremely fearful. She's like, my blood pressure is sky high. This is abnormal for me. And I'm a bit worried. I don't know if I should go to the hospital because will I contract it when I enter there, or should I remain home and potentially stroke out? And so we will see that with a level of anxiety, there is an increase that will happen with our blood pressure. And then we will see that, as we engage in, and we'll talk about some coping strategies a bit later, but when we begin to engage in a level of coping, we will see that our blood pressure will decrease. So again, these are some normal situations that will happen, and our mind is perpetuating, right, thoughts of gloom or doom or worry, and you will find that you may suffer from a bit of anxiety. Anxiety has the ability to impair your level of functioning. So again, for many of us that are working from home, if we're feeling extremely anxious about this situation, you will find that it will be difficult for you to engage in the tasks at hand, thus potentially frustrating or exacerbating even more anxiety or worry or fear because we're not able to complete the task. And we know that our supervisors or management is looking, right, for us to produce, and we're unable to. And many times we don't know how to articulate what we're feeling because we're just unaware that this is what's going on. And it's the thoughts of whether or not this imminent danger may actually come to your doorstep. It may also impair your ability to engage in any level of relationship with your spouse, with your loved ones, with your children, right? It may be difficult to articulate what you're feeling on the inside of your body, and so you lash out, or you may, kind of shy away simply because, right, you need some of that social distancing even within your home because you can't really share what it is that you're feeling on the inside. And so I had a bit of data, and this is coming from APA, so the American Psychiatric Association, and it was just simply stating that adults, about 18% of the adults in America will, right, have a level of anxiety or even receive the disorder. Most oftentimes it's called generalized anxiety. So we call that GAD, and it's just kind of common, right? But then we have other types of anxieties, and we won't delve so deeply into that. But if you have children, if you have nieces or nephews or grandchildren, there is the possibility for them also to obtain a level of anxiety. And we're looking at between the ages of about 13 and 18, about 25% of them will acquire anxiety. And we see this quite frequently within our school systems. But now that they're at home, there's a different type of an anxiety that's, is kind of arising. And it's coming because they're not able to be children. They're not able to go outside, play, engage, and interact with their peers. And so it is ratcheting up, again, these fears of worry of the unknown and worry of the future. So next, we have depression. This is one, and you'll see as we continue to go forward that there's a lot of overlap in mental health diagnoses. Some will look almost identical in certain areas. And again, it is a need to have a professional to assess what truly is going on so that we won't engage in self-diagnosing and have an increase of worry. So let's look at depression here. The definition. It says that it is a persistent feeling of sadness. And I want to kind of highlight that word, persistence. So we all will one day feel sad about something, right? But it is the elongated feeling of sadness that kind of qualifies one for having depression. It is looking at, right, no break in this feeling of sadness and or worthlessness. Within the definition, you'll see that it is also accompanied by a lack of desire to engage in those things that used to be pleasurable for you. So if you enjoyed, let's say, knitting or sewing, and all of a sudden you just have no desire to engage in that thing that brought you so much joy and so much pleasure and ease, because you are overwhelmed by kind of this dark cloud, right? Depression drains your energy, right? So that kind of goes along with this. I just can't bring myself to do what it is that I desire to do anymore. It drains your hope. And I know that this program tonight is placed on by a church. And so we know that our hope is grounded in Jesus, right? But I often tell people that we have to pay and pray, because we look and we need those practical tips, and we need to sometimes hear someone that affirms us in our hope, right? And so I don't believe that God looks or frowns upon the need to kind of engage with other individuals. He says there's power in fellowship. There's power in wise counsel. And that is kind of what therapy is for those that may be dealing with a measure of mental illness. The depression, again, it may actually drain your drive. So you could have all of the most ingenious ideas and creative ideas, and then find that intrinsically you're unable to actually put those things into place. So these are all some things that kind of qualifies or helps you from a practical standpoint to assess whether or not you may be suffering from a measure of depression. Again, it is not a fleeting thing, right? So it's persistent, and it is complex. It interferes with your everyday functioning. So not just every now and then. It is, I can't get up in the morning. I can't do my, what we would call our ADLs, right? Our everyday things that we need to do: shower, comb your hair, put on clean clothes, clean your home, those sorts of things. It interrupts your daily activities. You may see that there is a prolonged social stressor, which COVID-19 has thus become, is prolonged. I got another call today saying, okay, yeah, I think we're going to be shut down for another 2 weeks, right? Our governor came on and this was, right, the new order. And so we have to comply. But what does that do when we're continually saying that we need to have some social distance, right? We need to make certain that we're watching how these disruptions, these elongated periods of time that are disrupting, right, our ability to engage with our loved ones and our friends and our colleagues, how is that affecting us? I wanted to add in here that grief and loss, when you're looking at the 5, now they say 6 steps of grief and loss, that one of those steps looks at depression. But it's a little different, right? It doesn't kind of go along with the same trajectory as depression does, but it does show up. That looming sadness, right? That loss. And so we're seeing that in COVID-19, many of us, as I stated earlier, are losing loved ones. And that hurts, right? And that's heavy to bear. And many of us have not even been able to have a level of closure with that. That can send one into a level of depression. Guilt can send you, when you're dealing with grief and loss of a loved one, into a level of depression. And so we want to be mindful that if these sorts of scenarios have been a part of your life during this time, that it would be to your advantage to seek out a therapist or a counselor that you feel most comfortable with, that has an expertise, because there's a difference, in who you identify as your therapist. You want to identify whether or not these are their particular skill sets. And so I'm going to kind of go on, because I put a bit in there about depression because I'm hearing so much about it that I wanted us to kind of touch on a bit further. So we have here some of the 10 common symptoms. And what I will do, Tracy, is at the end of the webinar today, I will get you these tools so that you could have readily available for your church as well as for your nonprofit.
Great, thank
so
you.
that people
Yes.
can, yeah, you're very welcome.
Awesome.
So that people are aware and they can kind of measure what it is that they're experiencing. So here, when we're looking at the 10 common symptoms, we have a loss of interest, again, in the daily activities. We have the fluctuation in the weight changes. I know in my household, it's like, oh no, let's avoid going over there to, stand on our weight in the bathroom there. So, but it's normal, right? It is normal to have some fluctuation, but we want to look at whether or not it is a significant amount of either weight loss or weight gain. Again, we talked about kind of those sleep changes and whether or not one may be experiencing insomnia. Are you like not able to go to bed at night? Your mind is racing and you can't get it to stop. And then by the time you go to sleep, are you like oversleeping and you can't get up to make it into work or into school or whatever your roles and responsibilities are for the day? Some other ones that come along depression, I don't know if many people kind of know, but anger, right? We only look at depression as sadness, but anger and agitation and irritability is also a key and common symptom, as well as self-loathing, reckless behaviors, and we'll talk a bit about that a little later when I get to PTSD and trauma. And you'll see some overlap there, but there are some reckless behaviors that people will get into because they're trying to feel again. The sadness is so heavy that they need to have a measure of being alive, and so that recklessness will come about. And then lastly, and again, I'll hand this out and I won't go through every single bullet point here, but it's that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness that tends to kind of be that dark cloud that rests above our head. So I wanted to touch on this. I just wanted to talk about men for a bit and put that out there that they tend to overlook some of their signs of depression that are commonly there. I had a discussion with a friend the other day, and we were talking about men and depression and the avoidance that kind of comes about when we look at mental health, or the need to feel right, super masculine, or the machismo has to come out, and then we miss the fact that we may have a level of mental illness. And so the 3 most commonly overlooked signs for men is physical pain in the body, Anger, and again, that level of recklessness. There is, a love of sports for men, but sometimes it can go a bit too far. And so you'll find that they may engage or pursue dangerous sports. You may see that they may engage in reckless driving because right now that is the only level of control that they can have, and that is, right, their vehicle. And so these are some things that I did want to highlight. I also wanted to touch on the fact that with men, they are 4 times more likely to, and you'll see the word here, commit, and I pulled this off of the CDC, but the accurate or the more appropriate terminology is complete, right? So they complete suicide 4 times above women, right, when they are untreated in their levels of depression. Some of the triggers for men is loneliness or a lack of social support. So right now with the social distancing, we have many individuals that are living alone. They don't have a spouse, right? They may not be able to physically go into the office and deal with their comrades. They may not be able to get out on the basketball court. I know in Michigan, they just opened up the golf courses. So, that kind of helps for some. But, their social support, their social network, and those things that they enjoy doing has been removed during COVID-19. And so loneliness can ensue. We also have a history of early trauma or abuse that they have incurred. And you will find that even with the fewer social outlets, you'll see that they tend to kind of withdraw from everyone and they will just deteriorate, or as it says here, age in isolation. Here we have for women, they are twice as likely than men to suffer from depression. And it kind of all goes within that bullet point, right? The social life, the experiences of relationships, whether they are positive and or negative, looking at, right, hormones within women, reproductive hormones, they trigger us into spaces of depression. You will find again that they too will have aches and pains, right, within the body. You'll see in women bloating. And so you're like, oh my goodness, what in the world is going on? Like, my stomach looks bigger. Well, when we start to look at what is going on in your life, the digestive system, right, is being affected, and thus you'll find bloating within women. You often find, I was talking to some individuals this week as well, and they were like, oh my goodness, the sun is out. Like, my mood is so much better. And so when we look at SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder, it kind of goes along with it. And so one thing that women can do is they can have sun lamps. You can actually buy this. So for those days where it's dark and dismal out, you can put on your sun lamp within the home, and that can actually help to alleviate some of these feelings of depression. And then we look at the stronger feelings of guilt and worthlessness, right? Looking at things that have been said and or done to us in our past that makes us kind of carry a heavier weight. Some of those triggers, again, marital relationships, familial relationships, issues with money as single women, right? If you have to care for a family and you don't have the additional income of a spouse, you may find that this persistence of having issues with not enough money to care for your family can trigger one into a level of depression. They too deal with issues with discrimination quite heavily on their jobs, right? Knowing that I'm qualified to do more, but potentially may have one that doesn't recognize their worth within a company. And so that could potentially trigger one into a level of depression as well. Again, I won't go through all of them, but these are some of the key triggers of female depression. PTSD. So this is the third and the last diagnosis that I wanted to touch on today. And so PTSD often is thought about in war, as if someone had gone, right, let's say over to another country and had to fight for our country. And they come back with a level of distress that is difficult for them to manage on a day-to-day basis. Well, that is not the only thing that, resolves in our minds when we think of PTSD. So the definition of it is a psychiatric disorder that can occur in anyone, right, who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event. And so it goes on here to just kind of talk about some of them. But when I work with clients, I love to kind of tap into and push a bit. We call it their window of tolerance. Like we want to push back on what we think a war is like. And we want to look at what war truly can be or combat. And right now, many of us are warring within our minds against a virus. And that can become traumatizing to us when we have no power or control over this particular situation. And that doom, that gloom, that fact or the feeling that this thing is winning or beating us can thus have an adverse effect on our psyche. In addition, when we're looking at PTSD, we're looking at a level of intensity. We're looking at disturbing or intrusive thoughts or feelings that are related to experiences. And most times it is experiences that have happened in our past, but it can also be experiences that are actually residing within our present day situations. Some of the data on PTSD, it says that it affects approximately 3.5% of the adults within America. There's an estimated 1 in 11 people will be diagnosed with PTSD within their lifetime. So they'll have a diagnosis of trauma. But then again, we have to look at, especially within the African American community, those of us that do not engage in therapy and will never know, right, that they actually have this thing. And so lastly, we see here that the American Psych Association indicated that women, again, are twice as likely as men to have PTSD. And I find that quite interesting when we're looking at the fact that trauma is all around us. Like bad things happen to us all the time. Whenever we ask the question, it's simply, what has happened to you in your life? And most have come, if not all, have come from a level of dysfunction within their family system. And that has resonated with us today. But to see that they say women are twice as likely, I think that may come from the fact that they actually may engage in a level of self-report, or they actually are seeing a therapist. So the internal family system, really what that is that within us, we have parts to ourself. So there are 4 parts to the self, one of which is self, right? I am Leah. That's who I am. But then when we're looking at trauma, we're looking at a splitting of sort. We see that there are 3 parts that are outside of just the self, but reside within. And that is exiles, managers, and firefighters. So when we see or we think of the word exile, it is something, again, that has transpired in our past. But when we're talking about the internal family system, it is things that have been said to us that were hurtful, that just kind of replays. Like they say, you keep playing the tape back, right? And so when we're looking at COVID-19 and we see the imminent, right, doom that is happening around us, what are some of those things? And I want you just to spend a moment, because I want this to become real to you and not just, this higher level conversation that's happening. But I want you just to spend like maybe 60 seconds thinking about some things that have been playing back in your mind and associating it to what we're seeing during this pandemic and COVID-19. Like for me, right? I think about, wow, these are the last days. Well, the last days for me were very scary the way they were presented. And so I have to kind of look at that and see, okay, am I kind of fearful? Am I worrying a bit too much because this is something that I've been told? So I want you for about 60 seconds, and I'm gonna be quiet. Think about some exiles that you can think of that are in the back of your mind that's coming up as you are in the pandemic currently. We're at about 30 seconds. Give you another 30. All right. And so as I sit, right, with myself, and many have been saying this, like, wow, this is a time where we can't really run from who we are. We can't avoid it. So, Tracy, if you would do me a favor, I want to kind of hear from our audience just briefly to see like what sorts of thoughts came back to your mind when thinking about COVID-19 that may have made a level of discomfort, right, come about your body or your mind? Is there anyone?
I've unmuted it so you all can speak.
Well, I'll speak first. I I've been thinking about this, almost daily in thinking that we're being cautious, but how much my family needs me. And then
Yeah.
I think about the 10-year-old that we have. Um, he doesn't get out much, but the thought of him being sick or injured is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I would call sneaky stress. It kind of rides underneath the surface because we know what face we have to put on and what we're supposed to say and what
Yeah.
we're supposed to do. But these things are real. I have adult children who are living on their own. And I'm not sure if they're taking the proper precautions. They say it, but are they really doing it? They're all working. And so all of those things are with me every day.
Yeah, yeah. And so I like that term, right? The sneaky, right? Those thoughts that kind of come in when we don't give them permission to come in. They're always, right, making their way to the forefront. And so I'm just going to ask you this. How does that match with fears of your past?
Um, well, I really put everything in the context of preparedness. I know that there were many things that my parents didn't know. And so we had unnecessary trials and tribulations in some instances. And I think about what I haven't done and what I could have done and what I should have done. And those are rabbit trails that can absorb days. You talked about being up at night and that kind of thing. Your mind won't stop. All of those things happen to me.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing. If there is one more, we'll take one more and then we'll move on. Is there anyone else that would like to share?
Yeah, hi, this is Gladys. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I just want to say I agree with the pastor. My thing is my children and as well as myself. I was watching the news and how they're talking about there's a mutation of the virus. They got the East Coast corona and the West Coast corona. And now they got the babies coming out with the rashes and, and it's just you can overwhelm yourself with so much news, so much information that you sometimes you just got to step away and say, I'm not watching the news today. It's bothering me, and what that, how that affects my fears of my past is being able to care for my kids, raising them as a single parent. I had to work, I had to leave them alone, and I had that anxiety, separation anxiety, where I had to leave them at young ages and wondering, are they being cared for? Are they taking, is the babysitter or the nursery school watching them the correct way? And I find myself wondering, are my kids taking care of my grandkids? Are my kids taking care of themselves? I have a son that's a barber. I have another son that's in the TSA. They're around the public constantly. And I try not to let those thoughts worry me, and try to lean and depend and trust on the word of God that gives me that assurance that he has this. He knows the plans he has for me and my family. And for me to just, take it down, Gladys, take it down a step, take it down a notch. Don't worry. He said he's going to hold me up with his righteous right hand. So I got to trust in those words. And so that's what I wanted to share.
Oh,
If
thank
I
you
could
so much.
if I
Go
could
ahead,
just
Pastor.
provide a little clarity for what I was trying to say, because I don't think I articulated it very well.
Okay.
To say it clearly, there is so much that happened to us in my childhood that to this day my parents do not know.
Yeah.
It's not because they weren't good parents. It's not because they didn't do the best they can. It's just so many opportunities, whether we took them or whether we just ran into them,
Yeah.
be in harm's way.
Yeah.
And I think about that and wonder, in reference to the smallest one and the older ones, I have to admit it. I worry about what I don't know or what I can't control. I guess that's a better way to put it. What is it that I can't control?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing and for giving us clarity. Like, when we look at this and we start to parse it out, what it does is it makes us start to look at ourselves in a particular way, right? And that's where the evolution of the negative beliefs tend to come about, right? That's where the worry, that's where the gloom and doom comes from, is we take a situation and we own it onto ourselves, right? And we can't create that distance. But the other, I'm going to move on because I know we're literally, kind of strapped for time. But again, I want to appreciate everyone that was open enough to be able to share something that was so personal and deep to them. Thank you again. So going on, when we're looking at the internal family system, we talked about the exiles, but then we have the managers. And so that's those things that we're able to do every single day that helps to kind of keep us feeling like we're above water and that we're not sinking amidst this pandemic. And so simple things just like turning on the news, fact finding, right? Making certain that we're up on everything. We feel that we are managing our reality, taking all of the herbs that we can get and boosting our immune system, another way of managing our reality. But then we can get to firefighters. And most oftentimes people look at firefighters as those negative things that we begin to do to ourselves when our managers no longer work, right? When we've done all that we can and we still find out that, oh I've taken this test and now I have COVID. So what do, right? Or I've done all that I could and a loved one passed and I did everything that I could in my power. Now what? So you will find that with firefighters, again, they tend to become extremes. They go to the extreme end of the spectrum, from exiles of telling us negative things about who we are or what we're doing, to the complete opposite of, oh, I can't handle this anymore. And so that's where the addictions tend to come in. And it doesn't have to just be substances. It can be food. It can be shopping online because we can't get out, right? It can be a measure of things that we turn to. Sadly, we're seeing that so many are turning to suicide. And that is a very disheartening thing, but I would say a lot of it is coming from the fact that they're just unaware where they are in their current reality in mental illness amidst COVID-19. So our parts of self they meet up with our traumatic past, and we begin to have physiological responses within our body. Some, and I won't go into all, you may find that you may have racing thoughts. I think that when I talked about the overlap, you'll see that those racing thoughts may be the insomnia that you felt, which is keeping you up at night and thus, sending you into panic, which is a part of anxiety, or even into depression. You may find that, your hands are sweaty, or you may have the digestive issues because the blood is trying to remain in the large muscles of the body so that you can fight, off something, or run, which is the flight. So I wanted just to kind of talk about just briefly those physiological responses that are most common. And it is, just right now, the racing thoughts, the, digestive issues, the butterflies in the stomach, the issues with not eating as much, all of those tend to overlap with trauma. Here are some more symptoms of trauma, which, again, anxiety, we see shock or denial or disbelief. When we lose a job or we lose a loved one, are we in total disbelief? When I can't go and see my loved one at the hospital, are we in total disbelief? Are we having those intrusive thoughts that are coming up when we don't want them to? Are we having nightmares as our minds are trying to digest everything that's going on that just really isn't making sense? Are we confused, or disoriented? Some people actually, if they've had a level of trauma in their past that has been unresolved or undiagnosed, then you will find that this disorientation can actually go to dissociation, where some will have out-of-body level experiences. They feel as though they're in a fog, or they're actually looking at themselves like they're watching a movie. So it can go, and it can be very extreme, and then some may have some more milder forms of it. Some additional traumatic symptoms. I think the pastor kind of mentioned the coulda, woulda, shouldas, The guilt or the shame or the self-blame of not being able to do enough or to protect those that they love. And so they may go even further down that rabbit hole again into feeling disconnected or numb, sad, isolating, or withdrawing, or even taking out anger on those that they love. So I wanted to note here that environmental factors play a role. So the continued exposure to violence, neglect, abuse, domestic violence is very high right now within the family system, because we're not accustomed to having to be around each other 24/7. We have some sort of reprieve. I get to go to work. My husband gets to go to work. My kids get to go to school, or they're off on campus. Well, no, all of that was turned upside down. Everybody's at home. The one that just moved out in my household came back with a dog. So I'm like, Lord have mercy. I have acquired someone else that I have to care for. But it's been all good. It's been all good. But we want to look at, how the environmental factors are playing a role in the development of mental illness. Poverty, not being able to have access to certain things, not having an income, looking to get your unemployment and potentially being denied, or not being able to get through on a phone call, but yet and still, my creditors are still calling and they still want to be paid. So all of these types of environmental factors play a role in the development of mental illness. Okay. And if you've already had a diagnosis of some sort, please be aware that it can increase the symptomatology that you are experiencing. So I had here, again, I want to be kind of cognizant of the time. This was a question that I wanted to throw out to the audience. And I won't go too far into it. I'm gonna just ask one person that would be willing to share. Why do you feel that there's a fear of admitting that one may have some mental health concerns and to express the fact that it is affecting their level of functioning during this COVID-19 pandemic? Just one individual.
Well, I would say the fear stems from the fact that how we look at people who say that we have any concerns or any issues. You understand what I'm saying? The stereotypes that come with it, that type of thing. So there is a hesitancy, especially in our community, for us to even acknowledge that we are dealing with, anything, let alone the mental health aspect of it. And then, of course, we don't want to, get the help. I think you had mentioned something about, the self-help that we try and do, or pray it away, which, you can, but you stated you pray, but you also get help as well. So I think that's one of the reasons, just that whole stigma of it, the label that it has with it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing, Tracy.
And then could I also just add, sometimes we don't even know what it is that we're experiencing. We don't acknowledge it as being a mental health issue, or even with me, like some of the things that you mentioned today. This is Beverly, by the way. Some of the things that you mentioned in the depressed category. I mean, those are things that I'm experiencing by nature. I'm a bubbly person. So some of the things that I am experiencing as a result of being in this pandemic situation is quite depressing, So, but I would not have categorized it as being depressed. So sometimes it's just a lack of knowledge. You know what I'm saying? So, okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. I appreciate you saying that. And I think that, what tends to happen is we don't identify the incongruence in who we used to be and who we are now.
Yes.
And holding on to and accepting the fact that, wow, today I'm just not who I used to be. And so, Tracy, you talked about, right, the stigma. And before I go, a little bit further into that, but when you're looking at it, there's like this dark cloud over mental health. And I want us to remember that the mind and the body are one, right? Science, for some reason, has severed the head, and now they've put it in two different categories or silos, right? They like, mental health and then physical health. No, the mind controls the body, right? Absent the mind, there is nothing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, we've made it a weakness.
Yeah.
And so we have all kind of issues that are layered. As Americans, we're proud. Yeah. We don't want to show any chinks in the armor. As people of color, we don't trust anybody. And we have a stigma about sickness or health, period. We don't want anybody to think that we're falling short somewhere. And then as Christians on top of it, it's unfairly tying faith to wellness as it comes to your physical and mental body. And that is a misnomer. It's not true whatsoever. There is, and maybe I should preach on it when we come back, because there are many therapy sessions in the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, where God has to pull somebody to the side and say, look, you having a breakdown. You just need to sit down and let's talk about this. And so, but I think it's all those different things: being American, being a person of color with trust issues, and then somehow we think that medicine and faith are at war with one another, and that is not true.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that, Pastor. I hope you do preach that. I hope you do, because it is so needed, right, to kind of ward off, right, the stigmatization of seeking counsel, Right. That's all it is. I think I saw one other, and then I'm going to move forward. I believe it was Joel Middleton. I saw his screen light up. Joel, if you're there. All right. Well, we will move on.
Am I unmuted?
Oh, there you go. Yep. Go ahead,
Can you hear
Joel.
me?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
All right. Speaking as a Black man in the church, the stigma of people, one, knowing your business is unfortunate, but it keeps a lot of men from stating when they're having emotional issues.
Yeah.
You know, we're always taught to be tough, and you know, from little fellas all the way up, and to have an emotional issue, it has a stigma of being soft.
Yeah.
So that keeps a lot of men from actually speaking up to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I often say, you know, especially in the Black community, there is a phrase, man up, right? Whenever a young man wants to shed a tear or even express anything of emotional magnitude. And so I often say man up equals man down. And so we have to be able to talk about these things more openly and allow a space that is safe enough to be able to share, because it's scary, especially in the Black community, when we say we're going in this house, stay in this house, right? There's a lot that goes on within the home that should not remain in the home, that should have never been in the home. But we need to allow for space for healing to take place. So thank you so much, Joel, for sharing that. All right, I'm going to move on. We touched a bit about, right, the mental health and the Black community, looking at stigma. And just basically, right, we have this thought of, if we say that we have a mental health concern, that we're crazy. And my question is really, what is crazy? That there is no true definition that attaches to this, outside of the fact that historically, right, our people were put away, they were shunned, and they were harmed. And I didn't go into it, and I won't go so far into it. If you decide to ask me back, I can, you know, kind of flush that thing out for you. But the reality is that the mental health hospitals and asylums, those sorts of things, when persons of color had to, you know, seek a level of help, they were harmed amidst that process. And it's not just those asylums, it has been the healthcare industry at large. And we have to continually push against that harm, or
So I have a
engage
question,
level of harm.
Leah. When you say they were
Okay.
harmed, are you talking about harm physically, or were they used as experiments? Go on and touch on that when you say harmed.
Okay. So when I say harmed, I do mean physically. I
Mm-hmm.
do mean that there were experimentations
Yes,
that were done on Black people.
yes, yes.
One in particular, I believe it was in Maryland or Virginia, but I know it was East Coast, and it was called the Hospital of the Negro Insane.
Mm.
And as individuals were brought there, no matter what the age, right, you could have been a youth or an adult, a level of experimentation would take place,
Yes,
such as lobotomies, right? And
yes,
other sorts
yes,
of experimental things for the mind. They figured that this was a measure of mind control. It would stop one from being so aggressive. So it was behavioral modification in their mind's eye, but they were doing great harm, and people died. Out back, they would have cemeteries of individuals with no name. And so if we bring this forward to COVID-19, right, as we look at the media, we see bodies being thrown into, right, abandoned homes here in the Detroit area. We see bodies being thrown into hotels. So it brings back, right, those memories. Again, talking about trauma, it brings forward those memories of those things that have happened that were ill towards us. And it may make persons of color shun the mental health community or that thought process. So my advice would be to identify one that you trust, right? You have the ability to speak from a cultural perspective and ask for one that you feel most safe and most comfortable with, and they have to honor that. Here, when we're looking at present day, I wanted to just kind of touch on something that I had read, and it was a statement on COVID-19 by the APA and health disparities. This was written on April 11th, and it reports. It says, reports are emerging on the disproportionate impact of the virus on the Black community. It further goes on that the APA president, Dr. Bruce Schwartz, stated, and this is in quotes, "It doesn't discriminate, but the African American community is particularly hard hit." He further goes on to say, "We call upon local, state, and federal authorities to be mindful of this disparity and ensure that proper treatment and care is provided." But when I hear this and I read this, it begs me to question, right? If you're saying that this doesn't discriminate, then why is there a need for the officials to take note and be mindful of? What are they being mindful of, right? And so when we read, we want to make certain that we're reading in between the lines to see how this situation is adversely affecting us. And we go forward to the CDC, some data from them. They say a new study was released, and it shows that 33% of the COVID-19 cases in March were African Americans. 33%, but we're not 33% of the population at this time. There's additional data, and I won't go into all of it, but it is stating that there are more Blacks dying again from the coronavirus in the US than whites and other ethnic groups. It says that Black Americans, they represent 13.4% of the population, where if the CDC said 33%, now we're looking at what, tripling who we are, you know what I mean? Like, this is real, and we have to remain aware and seek caution as we proceed. In the beginning, they were saying, hey, Black people can't get it. Next thing I know, Idris Elba, right? It was out there, he got it. Then it just began to increase. And so we want to be cognizant of the fact that this virus is real. It is not a game, right? A game may be potentially being played with it, but the virus itself is real, and we need to remain safe. I wanted to, just for the fact that many of our listeners may have been from Ohio, wasn't certain, but I wanted to bring it forward and just kind of state that African Americans make up 19% of the cases in Ohio, but again, only make up 13% of the state's population. So there is a fear factor. And when you break down the terminology that is being used about whether or not it discriminates, yet it shows asperity in its presentation, I wanted us just to be cognizant of how those words really play out. So when we look at discrimination, that means that there is an unjust or prejudicial distinction in the treatment of different categories of people, especially on the grounds of race. So when they say that the coronavirus does not discriminate, then we see that there's, right, an increase of African Americans that are disproportionately affected by it through whether contraction and or death. Then my mind again says, does it discriminate, right? I asked that question, and I would love for you all beyond this to just kind of ponder on that. When we look at the definition of disparity, it shows it's a great difference, one that is unequal and unfair. They exist among racial or ethnic groups. So these are language that's being used in reference from doctors, right, at the top levels of mental health and physical health institutions that are using this language, yet and still don't fully honor what it is that's happening. And so the Bible tells us there's nothing new under the sun. History will forever repeat itself. Do be aware. I'm not going to touch too long on this. I just want to say media intake, limit it. Limit how long you sit in front of the television consuming this information about death, right? Because whatever we take into our minds will have an adverse effect on our bodies. Philippians 4:8 tells us whatsoever things are what? True, honest, just, pure, whatever. We need to look for the good reports, right? And most of the media aren't giving us the good reports of, look at all of these people who have left or made it out of the virus. We don't get that. We get all of the gloom and doom. So we want to make certain that those things that are worthy to talk about, that we think on those things. The media, again, is one of the ways at least, that will assist to a deterioration or decline in your mental health. So if you feel that you need to engage in media on a daily basis, if that's something that your body is craving, again, we were talking about, right, those managers and then the firefighters. The firefighters would be all day, right, looking at media and then ruminating and perseverating on these thoughts all day long, versus managing would look more so like 10 to 20 minutes out of a day. I'm going to just do my check-in. I'm going to see, right, what the governor said for today. Check in and then tap back out again. Okay. So here are some coping strategies, and we're nearing the end of this. And again, like I stated, I will send out to your church family, Tracy, and your nonprofit organization, some of the coping strategies and the tips. For those that are not members of their church, I just extrapolated this information from the CDC, where you can get all of these various tips. And they even said, so it's not just me, they even said unplug from the TV and social media, right? Don't spend so much time listening to, right, the gloom of COVID-19 and the pandemic.
Yes.
It talked a bit about, right, taking care of your body, eating healthy, getting your exercise in, your sunlight. And we know that in our church system, right, New Start is just simply all of what they are now telling us, right, from the health institutions. And so we want to make certain that we're still getting sunlight. If you're not feeling up to it and having those feelings of depression, or even just dysthymia, which is kind of a low grade of depression where you just, I can't get myself to want to do today, and kind of sloughing around, open up a window, right? Get some sunlight. For me, sometimes I don't feel like going out, but I make certain that I get my sunlight through my window, right? You want to make certain that you avoid alcohol and drug consumption. It definitely will assist in the continued deterioration of the mind and body. God tells us definitely to remain sober in what it is that we're doing, so that we know when an issue is upon us, so that we can make good sound decisions. And so that would go along with the caring for one's body. And then just take time out to unwind. Like if that means to put on some nice Zen music, you can find that online. Go to YouTube and just type in Zen. You'll see a plethora of different songs that come up. There's no words to it. It may just be water. It may be a bell and a chime, or whatever it is that suits your fancy. Put that on in a space where you have designated for you. And then try your best to remain connected with family and friends, and thus find a therapist. If any of this is resonating with you today, make certain that you reach out to a mental health professional. I'm here if you need someone to kind of assist you through that process, or even have any fears. I am definitely open to assisting. And then lastly, I would say, I know I said pay and pray. So I talked about the therapist, but we don't want to neglect, right, grounding in God and making certain that we stay connected to our life source. He is the one that has it all under control, right? His will is going to be his will. And if we trust that and stay in constant communication with him, he will give us peace that we have no clue where it came from. And so I encourage everyone to continue to invest in their spiritual being so that they can be as whole as they can during this time. And if you find that, you haven't done it today, it's okay. You can pick up and do it the next day. All right, Tracy.
Oh,
So I
wow.
will end it there.
I just want to thank you so much. Just a plethora of information that you gave us. This last slide right here, you said you can provide this for us. Give it, make sure.
Yeah, and I have some others. I didn't want to consume the time.
Yeah, yes, some very, very good information.
Yeah, I can provide the coping strategies. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I have some that's for parents as well.
Great, great. Well, we certainly enjoyed you. Let me just open it up a little bit. If anybody had any questions or any comments, I think I muted everybody. So if anybody would like to say anything, now is your time. Let me see. I'm getting some chat messages. It was absolutely excellent. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? Okay, go on, Pastor.
Thank you, Tracy. I just wanted to say, sis, this is a top of the line professional presentation. I almost want to take up an offering, because I can see the preparation, the hard work, and the passion that has been put into it. And I just want to thank you for it. And I know that it will continue to be a blessing long after this hour that we spent together, because people can go back and watch it and share it. And I certainly will do that and promote that because we do need these kind of conversations that are rooted in facts and rooted in serious, credible conversations versus the paranoia and all the theories that are out there.
Yeah.
The people need to hear from the church, and they also need to hear from people who have some kind of experience and expertise in that area. And so I am very grateful, and I thank you, and I want to say, job well done.
Yes, yes, yes.
I too want to say thank you so much. I mean, you brought this message so clear, and we're doing a Bible study on interpretation, and your interpretation was phenomenal. You broke it down, so the language was right on point. I learned new words and new meanings. My only concern was the how the media doesn't really represent the African American community, and so you find a lot of us saying that doesn't affect me because I don't see me on TV, or they don't do the things that the YouTube families do. They do the Superman dances, they're drawing on the sidewalks, and they're having family time and this, that, and the other. And I think there's different concerns or different things in our community that's not really being brought out in the media. And that's my concern about reaching our community, where they realize that this is serious. This is not a joke here. And I that's what I got. But I just loved it. Please come back, please.
Oh, thank you so much. What I would say in regard to your sentiment about the lack of representation of what is affecting our community, we just have to remember, right, who owns the media.
Yes.
And so we have to figure out, right, how we can bring voice to some of our concerns, and forums like this,
Yes.
right,
Yes.
is where we begin. Mm-hmm. I think that there are individuals that are trying to kind of get the word out. I think some are trying to get the word out in ways that they may be missing the mark because they're not necessarily looking at the picture beyond, right? There's always something going on beyond what you see on the face. When you look in legal jargon, they call it prima facie, right? So on its face, we see something, but beyond that, there's always something else that's going on behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. So, we have individuals that's fighting for the rights of Black people, but don't understand that they may be fighting right, for the demise, but it looks good. So for instance, we may be saying we need to get more tests in urban areas. But have we really thought about whether or not we want to get more tests inserted into urban areas? Because what else may be inserted, right? So we want to be wise when we, have these types of conversations. We want to be cognizant of what may be seen versus what may be going on behind the scenes, and like really engage in a level of critical thinking before we act. I always tell people, even in therapy, think first and then act. Give yourself a span of time before you do that, because impulsive type decisions that's based just solely on what's seen without engaging in time to kind of analyze what's going on can actually be to your demise. So again, our realities are vastly different in urban areas. I think that the church has a place to, or a space to play, excuse me, and what is done for the community. I think that, our community service departments definitely can assist in filling in the gap for them and educating them on what best practices can be done right now until they get to a place where they buy into therapeutic modalities at large.
Well, the media is designed to speak to the majority, not the minority.
Indeed.
And so what we perceive sometimes as racism is just indifference. There's just not enough of us for it to matter. And so we have to take on the attitude that Jews do, which is they don't leave it to anybody else to create a positive outlook for their people. They do it themselves.
Yes, yeah.
And they don't depend on or wait on somebody else to do it. And therefore, you see their attitude toward education, toward life, toward everything is a positive outlook because they like what they see when they look in the mirror. And that's the posture that we have to take. When I was in Ghana, it was weird because everybody, every TV show, every billboard, every commercial, every news broadcast, everybody was Black. And I didn't know how to take that because I've never seen anything like that in my life. But that just told me something about sometimes we look at things as somebody is attacking us or denying us our rightful place, but really they're looking at it as you don't matter. They count it as who has the majority vote, who pays the majority taxes, who owns the majority land. We need to cater to them. And everybody else, if you don't like us, it won't matter because we have the majority. So what I'm saying is self-sufficiency, and what you have promoted all night, all I heard was we have to think positive and take the positive approach to things. And we have to be personally responsible for that.
Yeah, but we have to be honest too, right? So we have to engage in a level of honesty. And I think one that was on the call spoke about transparency, and that is tough, right? When one has so much pain and it has been held very close to their heart, like we said, to entrust you to hold what I have been holding for so long. You got to show yourself friendly. And I think that was what Jesus did when he walked the earth, is that he mixed, he mingled, he built rapport with the individuals first before he engaged in a level of teaching or even setting those individuals free of whatever it is that they were dealing with. So relationship is huge. It's going to be key. And we have to figure out how to, again, Pastor, as you're saying, get the proper imagery. When you're talking about other ethnicities, they make certain that the models or the images that's before their children and their people look like them. We have the ability to do that as well. We just have to, right, deal with some of the negative beliefs that we've internalized about ourselves, extinguish that, and then we'll be able to see us all as a whole through a much better light.
Well, if there are no more questions, comments, again, I would like to thank you, Leah, for a job well done. Definitely well done. It was thorough, enlightening, and it's hopeful. Gave us some hope in the midst of this hopelessness that we're going through. I'd like to thank Pastor Hood, the Southeast Seventh-day Adventist Church, again for allowing us to use this forum to bring this information. And like the pastor said, we definitely need to utilize our platform to let others hear what you said tonight, because it's so beneficial. So on behalf of TBP organization, we thank each and every one who joined in tonight. Thank you for your comments and for your input. And don't forget to sign in next. We have another event coming up the next Thursday evening, again, on how to, control or help maintain your sanity, your well-being, your physical well-being through these times that we're living in. So thank each and every one for joining in, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you again for having me. You all have a blessed night.
My pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Leah. You were exceptional. Thank you.
Yes.